Hello, everyone. We're going to go over chapter 13 today. So let's start out by looking at our vocabulary here in chapter 13. I'll start at the top of the right-hand column. Our first word we have is Adama. Adama. Adama means ground or earth. If you think that this looks an awful lot like Adam, which is Adam, mankind, there's a reason for that. It's because in the Hebrew Bible, Adam is made out of Adamah. Our second word is Ain. Ain. Ain means there is not or there are not, and is sometimes known as the particle of non-existence. We'll talk a little bit more about Ain later today. Next, we have one of our new pronouns, Ela. Ela. Ela means these, and it can be either these masculine things or these feminine things, either one. Next up, we have aim. Aim. Aim means mother. There is an alternative version of this word, which is Ema, which also means mother. I'm not sure why they're giving us aim to start with, but here we are. Notice that there's no ah ending on aim, so that might be a little confusing, but it is indeed a feminine noun. Next up, we have an important interjection, an exclamation. Hine. Hine. Hine means here is something. In older translations of the Bible, it's often translated as behold or lo, something like that. It's an attention-getting word. You stick it at the beginning of a sentence to make sure that people are paying attention to you. Next, we get two more new pronouns. We have zot and ze. Zot and ze. Both of these means this. Ze is masculine and zot is feminine. Notice that zot has a feminine tav ending on it. Now we're over in the top of the left-hand column. Our first word here is zera. Zera. Technically, this is actually a segulate noun. The reason that it's not segel, zera, is because of those guttural letters there. So it's kind of a weird segulate noun. But anyway, zera is seed, literally, or by metaphorical extension, descendants or offspring. Next up, we have yam. Yam. Yam means sea. So the Mediterranean Sea, for example, is Hayam HaGadol, the big sea. Notice particularly the plural here, yamim. Notice the dagish in the mem. That dagish is there because technically this root is yod mem mem, so two mems. So in the plural, that second mem comes back in the form of a dagish, but in the singular, you just lose the second mem. Now, you want to be particularly careful about this word because, as you may remember, we also already know the word yom. Yom. Yom means day, and its plural for days is yamim, with no dagish in the mem, and with a comments instead of the patak that we have here. So it's quite easy to get these confused, especially in the plural with the yamim and yamim. So watch out for that carefully. Next up is yesh. Yesh. Yesh means there is or there are, and is sometimes called the particle of existence. Yesh and ain, we're going to talk about both of them in a minute. Next up, we have Lila. Lila. Lila means night. So we know Yom, day. Here we have Lila, night. Next up, Ruach. Ruach means literally wind or breath, and kind of by extension, spirit. So something that sort of floats around. and doesn't have a visible form would be ruach. Ruach. Next, we have shamayim. Shamayim. Shamayim technically just means sky, but in English, it gets translated also as heaven. In Hebrew, there is no distinction between sky and heaven. It's all just the stuff up there. So shamayim is for both of those things. Like mayim, water, shamayim is always plural. So watch out for that. And finally, we have Torah. Torah. Torah means law or instruction, and is also the name that is used to refer to the first 5 books of the Bible, which you may know by the name the Pentateuch. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In Hebrew, that is HaTorah, the Torah. Okay, they give us a couple of different idioms here. A couple of them are with my friend, the directive hey. So we have Yama, which is toward the sea. You can think about where Israel is. What big sea do you think they're thinking of? They're thinking of the Mediterranean. So Yama, toward the sea, always means westward. Westward, to the west. We also have Hashamayma. Hashamayma. Notice the directive hey is on there again. This means toward the sky, toward the heavens. And finally, they give us halayla, tonight. So we know the word hayom, which is today, and here we have halayla, tonight. Okay, onward we go. There are a couple of different pieces of grammar in this chapter. First, they're going to introduce the verbless sentence, and then they're going to introduce, well, I'm not sure of the order, but they're going to introduce the particle of existence and non-existence, yesh and ain, and they're going to introduce a couple of new prepositions, are this and these prepositions. So those are the 3 pieces of grammar that we're going to look at. And they'll also, I think, introduce the third hey verbs in the imperfect. So that's kind of where we're going tonight. All right, first up, verbless sentences. Verbless sentences, sentences without verbs. In Hebrew, you can make a perfectly good sentence without actually including a verb. So we do this sometimes in English. If we're doing like caveman English, where it's for a joke or something, we might say, he Abraham, she Naomi, you know, me Tarzan, you Jane, that kind of way of speaking. You can also do this in Hebrew. So if you're just trying to say, he is something, or she is something, or they are something, you don't really have to put a verb in there. You can just put the 2 nouns. So we see some examples here. So we get hu Avraham. He is Abraham. He Naomi. She is Naomi. Haim Kohanim. They are priests. Anachnu b'Moav. We are in Moab. There you can see, you can get something a little bit more complex when you're doing your little verbless sentences. These don't tend to be very long. Sometimes you do get these embedded in longer sentences, so that's when it starts to get a little bit more tricky. But verbless sentences, I think, relatively straightforward thing to be looking at. Okay. Now, they make the point that once in a while, they'll do this in a sentence where they have both the noun and the corresponding pronoun, and then the thing that it's equal to. So here they give us the example, ha'av hu melech. Ha'av hu melech. So literally, this is the father, he is king. The father, he is king. They also give us the example, Sarah, he ha'em. Sarah, he ha'em. Sarah, she is the mother. Now, the reason that they do this is generally because it's actually a longer and more complicated sentence. And so they might give you something like ha'av asherhu melech. Well, really the verb should be at the beginning. So how about, let's see here, ra'ah ha'av asherhu hamelech et ha-kohanim. So the father, who is the king, saw the priests. So generally, you only get this kind of extra pronoun thing. It's technically called a resumptive pronoun. You usually only get this in a more complex sentence. So seeing it in these really short little sentences is pretty ridiculous. But generally, it's pretty clear from context what's going on. So just be aware that they have this possibility to do this. The reason they do it is to try to make the sentence more clear. And so I think generally it's not too confusing. So we've talked about verbless sentences. So if you have a situation where a noun is a different noun, and those two things are kind of being set together as equal, then you don't have to put a verb in there. Some other simple situations, like he is in Seattle, you don't really need to put the verb in there. So that's what we've talked about so far. All right, next topic are yesh and ein. Yesh and ein. Yesh, which we just learned means there is or there are. It's called the particle of existence. It's not a verb. Please note this with great care. Yesh and ein are not verbs. So they're not going to take our verb endings. There's no yeshti, yeshta, yesht. That's not a thing. They just get stuck in there in the present tense if you want to say that something exists. I think the reason Hebrew did this is because it doesn't really have a present tense. It has the imperfect, but as you guys know, the imperfect can be translated in a variety of ways. So in order to just say there is something somewhere, they have these two particles, the yesh and the ein. So let's look at these examples here. Yesh ish basada. Yesh ish basada. Yesh, there is. Ish, a man. Basada, in the field. Yesh anashim basada. There are men in the field. So we can see how that works. You can plug it in instead of using a form of haya, for example. You could, if you wanted to make this past tense, then you would want to use a form of haya, or if you wanted to do imperfect, then you would want to use a form of haya. So you could do haya ish basada. There was a man in the field. Hayu anashim basada. There were people in the field. So we see how yesh works. We just sort of plug it in instead of using a form of haya if we're working in the present tense. Rotate, rotate. Okay. How about ein? Ein is just the opposite. Ein means there is not or there are not. It's the negation of yesh, and you use it the exact same way. So ein ish basada. There is not a man in the field. Ein anashim basada. There are not people in the field. So just like yesh, it's not a verb, so it's not going to take any verb endings. It's not going to take any verb prefixes. It just means there are not. You can use yesh or you can use ein to negate a noun sentence. So if you have a verbless sentence, you can just use ein to negate that and not need to put a verb in. So if you have the verbless sentence, ata ish, you are a man, you can negate that with ein ata ish, you are not a man. And that's perfectly okay. If you want to negate a sentence that already has either a perfect or imperfect verb, instead of using ein, you want to use lo. So lo hayu anashim basada. There were not, see the verb hayu in there? There were not men in the field. David lo ra'a et yam. David did not see the sea. Ha'em lo tiftach et hasha'ar. The mother did not open the gate. So you can see how that works. If you have a perfect verb or an imperfect verb, use lo to negate it. Sometimes I see students try to combine ein and a perfect or imperfect verb, and they'll do ein hayu anashim basida or David ein ra'a et yam. That is not a thing. Please don't do that. It will make me cry. Not really. But still, please don't do it. Okay. We're going to skip over the imperfect of haya for a second. We'll come back to that at the end. So we'll go on down and look at our pronouns. Let's look at our pronouns. Okay. So if we want to do demonstrative pronouns, I don't know if that's a familiar term, demonstrative pronouns. The words this and these in English are demonstrative pronouns because they demonstrate which of something you're referring to. So say someone asks me, which book are you reading? And I point to one and I say, this book. So I'm demonstrating which book I'm referring to. So this and these are demonstrative pronouns in English. Instead of just having a singular and a plural, this and these, the way we do in English, in Hebrew, of course, we're going to have a masculine form and a feminine form in the singular. So we can say, we frequently see that these get used in verbalist sentences. That's why they put them in this chapter. So, for example, Zeh Melech, this is a king. So literally, this king. It would be, this is a king when you translate. Zeh Ha'am, this is the people. Zot Aim, this is a mother. Zot Haaretz, this is the land. It's going to be tempting to translate this as something like this king, this people. Don't do that. There's actually a different way that they do that in Hebrew. It would be Hamelech Hazeh for this king, Ha'am Hazeh for this people, Ha'im Hazot for this mother. So if you wanted to say this king, this people, this mother in Hebrew, you would put the zeh or zot second, but they're not going to teach us that yet because we haven't learned how to do adjectives. So once we learn how to do adjectives, they're going to circle back to this and show us how to use this and these as adjectives. For now, just know if you see them, it's kind of a this is or these are situation. Okay, so we have zeh, which is masculine. We have zot, which is feminine. And then for the plurals, these, we just use ela, whether we're dealing with a masculine noun or a feminine noun. So ela melachim, these are kings. Ela ha'aratzot, these are the lands. Do you guys see how that works? Just good old verbalist sentences with this and these. You can use them in sentences as well that have perfect or imperfect verbs. So, Zeh haya hamelech, this was the king. Zot tehyeh haaretz, this will be the land. Ela hayu hamlechim, these were the kings. You guys see how it works? Okay, so we've talked about verbless sentences, these very simple sentences with no verbs in them. We've talked about our particles of existence and non-existence, yesh and ein, and we've talked about our zeh, zot, and ela. Just check. Okay, there's nothing on that page. All right, we are going to go back over here. Okay. So let's talk about what we know about imperfect verbs for a second. So we know that our imperfect verbs can be translated in three ways. You can translate them as present, you can translate them as future, you can translate them as some kind of modal thing, right? We know that they get addit, naddit prefixes on them. We know they get a yod suffix, and my prefix and suffix language is totally wires crossed today. So we have addit, naddit prefixes, And then we have our suffixes, we have our yod, we have our una, like that. So those things are consistent no matter what's going on with our verb roots. However, we've also talked about the fact that depending what our root is, sometimes we get some vowel changes. So I'm actually going to start up a whiteboard over here and let us compare a couple of things. Okay, so if we are doing a regular imperfect verb like shamar, for example, we know that we get something like eshmor. So we know that we have our segel under the prefix, we have our sheva closing the syllable. Under the shin, we have our O vowel between the mem and the resh. I'm sorry that my letters look a little deformed. I'm not very good at drawing on the screen here. So normally that is the vowel pattern that we get. So if we want to do, instead of I will guard, if we want to do I will rule, we just get lo. Or if we want to do I will remember, we just get ezkor. So that would be our normal pattern. However, we've also talked about how having guttural letters as the final root letter can cause some differences. So if, for example, we have a third hay or third aleph verb, like shalach, we just get esh lach with our nice little patach here. So with a third chet or third ayin verb, we have our patach theme vowel. If we have a third aleph verb like ekra, then we get a comments down there. See it? So we remember that. We've also talked about some things that can happen when your first letter is weak. So last time we were talking about what do you do if your first root letter is weak. So if you have a first yod or first hay verb, we know that that yod or hay will drop and will end up with a tsere, kind of flagging what happened. So for example, if I had the verb yashav, we, instead of getting something like a shove, instead we get a shave with our dropped yod. For halach, we would get a lech, right? Because the hay will drop. It doesn't like having that pressure. So we know that. We also talked about the fact that lakach does a weird thing. So the lamed will assimilate and you end up with something like kach with a dogish in the cove. Anyway, so we know all this stuff at this point. What, however, is going to happen when it's not a third chet or third ayin, like this guy, and it's not a third aleph, like this guy, what's going to happen if we have a third hay situation going on? All right, now I'm going to go back over to the other page. Okay, so in this chapter, they introduce to us what's going to happen in the imperfect if you have a third hay verb. This is the set of forms for the third hay verbs, not just haya, but also any other third hay verbs that we have. They're going to tend to have this vowel pattern. So let's look at it. What do we see? We see that our prefixes are all totally normal. So we've got our addit and addit, we've got our segel in the first person singular, we've got our hirek vowels in the other prefixes, so that's totally normal. We see that in almost all, well, yeah, in most cases, we still have all three root letters. So we still have the hey, the yod, and the hey from the root. So that's nice in most forms. However, we do see that if you add a suffix, as you do in a few of these forms, that the hey is going to do its thing that we're used to from the perfect, and the hey is going to turn into a yod. So look down here at tehyu. This should have been tehayu, like that, but we've lost the hey. We've just plain lost the hey. It's gone away. Up here, tehyi, the hey has gone away. Down here in yehyu, the hey has gone away. Then in the form tehyena and tehyena, you can see there's two yods in a row. That second yod was originally a hey. So what's the rule? What's going on here? Well, as usual, the hey does not like meeting new people. If you add a new suffix after a hey, that hey is going to find a way to get out of there. It's either going to turn itself into a yod, the way it did in tehyena, or it's just going to drop out, the way it did in tehyi, tehyu, and yehyu. It's like, hey, there are vowels on either side of me now. I really feel like the odd man out here. I'm just going to leave. So it went home. So that's the main thing that we're seeing here. So just as we saw in the perfect, where the hey would either transform or drop in order to avoid meeting new people, in order to avoid claustrophobia, it's going to do the same thing in the imperfect. All right, so what's the other thing here about the imperfect? The other thing is the theme vowel. So we talked about how normal verbs have a holum vowel, so esh more, em lok, es kor. We talked about how third chet and third ayin verbs have a patach, so f tach, a da. What's going to happen with third hey? If you don't have some kind of suffix that's causing the hey to drop, you're going to end up with a segel. So not yo, but yeah. Tihya, yihya, tihya, nihya. You guys see that? Tihyena, tihyena. So for the theme vowel, use a segel. And if you're adding a suffix, the hey is going to either drop or disappear. Does that make sense? So just as with the third heys in the perfect, it's important to be able to recognize these, especially things like tehyi. I feel like the form tehyi is very easy to misunderstand. You look at this and you're like, okay, is this a root tav hey yod? Is this a root hey yod yod? If you look up either of those things, you're not looking in the right place. Hey yod yod, you're pretty close. Maybe you'll find the right thing if you look around a little bit. But it can be very deceptive. So you need to be aware that third hey verbs will do this and be able to look at a form like tehyi or tehyu and figure out what the root of that actually is going to be. It's actually a third hey root, and the hey has just run for the hills. Okay, so we've talked about verbless sentences. We've talked about yeshanein. We've talked about zezot and ela, our demonstrative pronouns. And we've finished up by talking about our third hey verbs. So it's not just ehya, tihya, tihi, yehya, tihya. This also works for other third hey verbs. So let's see, what other third hey verbs do we know at this point? Ra'ah. So, well, that one's a mess because it's got an aleph in the middle, but I'm pretty sure we do know some others. Oh, yes, asa. We know asa. So, e'asa, ta'asa, ta'asi, ya'asa, ta'asa. The hey is going to either drop or you're going to get that seggle vowel, right? So just become familiar with this pattern. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a great Thanksgiving, guys.